Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, it's good to see you again. So every time we have one of these hearings, we learn something new, but the conclusion I've drawn is that AI is ubiquitous. Anybody can use AI. It can be used in any endeavor. So when I hear you folks testifying about how we shouldn't be taking half measures, I'm not sure what that means. What does it mean not taking half measure on something as ubiquitous as AI, where there are other regulatory schemes that can touch upon those endeavors that use AI? So, there's always the question I have of when we address something as complex as how AI is looking, that there are unintended consequences that we should care about. Would you agree? Anybody? Mr. Smith?
I would absolutely agree. I think we have to define what's a full measure and what's a half measure, but I bet we can all agree that half measures are not good enough.
Well, that is the thing, how to recognize, going forward, what is actually going to help us with this powerful tool. So I have a question for you, Mr. Smith. It is a powerful tool that can be used for either good, or it can also be used to spread a lot of disinformation and misinformation, and that happened during the disaster on Maui. And Maui residents were subject to disinformation, some of it coming from foreign governments, i.e. Russia, looking to sow confusion and distrust, including don't sign up for FEMA because they cannot be trusted. And I worry that with AI, such information will only become more rampant with future disasters. Do you share my concern about misinformation in the disaster context and the role AI could play? And what can we do to prevent these foreign entities from pushing out AI disinformation to people who are very vulnerable?
I absolutely share your concern. And I think there's two things we need to think about doing. First, let's use the power of AI as we are to detect these kinds of activities when they're taking place, because they can enable us to go faster, as they did in that instance where Microsoft, among others, used AI and other data technologies to identify what people were doing. Number two, I just think we need to stand up as a country and with other governments and with the public and say there need to be some clear red lines in the world today, regardless of how much else or what else we disagree about. When you think about what happens typically in the wake of an earthquake or a hurricane or a tsunami or a flood, the world comes together. People are generous. They help provide relief. And then let's look at what happened after the fire in Maui. It was the opposite of that. We had some people, not necessarily directed by the Kremlin, but people who regularly spread Russian propaganda, trying to discourage the people of Lahaina from going to the agencies that could help them. That's inexcusable. And we saw what we believe is Chinese-directed activity trying to persuade the world in multiple languages that the fire was caused by the United States government itself using a meteorological weapon. Those are the things that we should all try to bring the international community together and agree they're off limits.
Well, how do we identify that this is even occurring, that there is, China or Russia-directed misinformation going on? How do we? I didn't know this was happening, by the way, and even in the Energy Committee on which I sit, we had people testifying, and I asked, regarding the Maui disaster, I asked one of the testifiers whether he was aware that there had been disinformation put out by a foreign government in that example, and he said yes, but I don't know that the people of Maui recognized that that was going on. So how do we, one, even identify that that's going on, and then to come forward and say this is happening, and to name names, identify which country it is that is spreading this kind of disinformation and misinformation?
I think we have to think about two things. First, I think we at a company like Microsoft have to lean in, and we are, with data, with infrastructure, with experts, and real-time capability to spot these threats, find the patterns, and reach well-founded conclusions. And then the second thing, this is the harder thing, this is where it's going to need all of your help. What do we do if we find that a foreign government is deliberately trying to spread false information next year in a Senate or presidential campaign about a candidate? How do we create the room so that information can be shared and people will consider it?
Yes.
You all, with this, the most important word in your framework is bipartisan. How do we create the bipartisan framework so that when we find this, we create a climate where people can listen? I think we have to look at both of those parts of the problem together.
Well, I hope we can do that. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, one of the concerns about AI from the worker standpoint is that their jobs will be gone. And Professor Herzog, you mentioned that that generative AI can result in job losses. And for both you and Mr. Smith, what are the kinds of jobs that will be lost to AI?
That's an excellent question. It's difficult to project that into the future, but I would start with saying that not necessarily something that can be automated effectively, but things that I think that those that control the purse strings think could be automated effectively. And if it gets to the point where it appears as though it could, I imagine you'll see industry move in that direction.
Mr. Smith, I think you mentioned in your book, which I am listening to, that things like ordering something out of a drive-through, that those jobs could be gone to AI.
Yeah, I was, 4 years ago, we published our book with my co-author behind me, and we said, what's the first job that we think might be eliminated by AI? We don't have a crystal ball, but I bet it's taking an order in the drive-through of a fast food restaurant. You're not really establishing a rapport with the human being. All the person does is listen and type into a computer what you're saying. So when AI can hear as well as a person, it can enter that in. And indeed, I was struck a few months ago, Wendy's, I think it was, announced that they were starting to consider whether they would automate with AI the drive-through. I think there's a lesson, though, in that. And it should give us both pause, but I think a little bit of optimism. There's no creativity involved in a drive-through, at least, listening and entering an order. There are so many jobs that do involve creativity. So the real hope, I think, is to use AI to automate the routine, maybe even the work that's boring, to free people up so they can be more creative, so they can focus more on paying attention to other people and helping them. And if we just apply that recipe more broadly, I think we might put ourselves on a path that's more promising.
Thank you.